All right, what is happening, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of The Deep End, episode 20. I can't believe we've hit 20. I guess like if we've been doing an episode per week on average, which we have, that means we're about what, 5 months into it. And then we've done some episodes before that were over on your channel. So I bet we've been having these conversations now. What do you think, for 6 months or so? Would you is that timeline right?
Just about, man. And it's crazy to even think about that we've been having these conversations almost every week. We've missed, I think, twice, if I'm not mistaken. But just even missing twice, it's been crazy to see the evolution of the deep end, the community's growing, and just
Yeah.
where everything's going. It's really exciting. And it's a tremendous feeling, I think, and you could probably attest to this too, to be sitting here and to be growing with a community. And the more videos that we make, the more comments that we're getting, more chats that we're having, the more messages that we're getting. And speaking of, I did just receive the other day a message on Blossom, which, of course, guys, the deep end is powered by Blossom. And so now running in tandem with Blossom, I mean, all good things, a lot of momentum. But I'm really excited, Ryne, because this message that came in through Blossom, I think, is a topic worth talking about. And actually, it relates and ties into what we kind of concluded last week's deep end chat speaking about. And I think we even went off record with some of our chat. But I'm going to
We were
read
talking
you.
we were talking about it a bit more after we ended the episode, huh?
Yeah, we went like hard after, and I almost feel bad that we shut the recording down and like didn't record what we were talking about because it was so rich. But I have this comment, or I have this message that came in, and it starts off by saying, "I don't know what you guys do for a living, but I can't afford to just throw money into the market like you guys seem to do. I live in Los Angeles. Cost per living is very high, and I'm late to the game. Probably ETF overlap, some individual stocks as well. My brokerage account, my Roth account. I'm pumping whatever I can into it and sticking to VOO, SCHD, DGRO, JEP Q, JEPI. What is this one? VWO, VIG, SOXQ, AIYY, NFLY. List kind of goes on there. And he's saying, I wonder if I should be selling out of some of these ETFs and positions and focusing more on a few of them. And how do you guys continue to throw as much money into the market as you do? Now, that message came in from Steve. Steve, if you're listening, your message was the chosen message here for this chat, at least to kick us off. And I'll now go back to even Ryne, what we were talking about off the recording the other week, which was we've noticed, whether it's some creators out there or followers, that there's a lot of like hype around throwing a lot of money into the market that hasn't necessarily, I don't want to put this, let's just say you're not necessarily living, Ryne, how can we put this nicely?
I think it
Because I'm
almost,
direct and I'm going to be like,
yeah,
boom.
I think maybe the way that it can come across to some people, seeing how much other people are contributing or throwing into their portfolios, I think for some people it maybe doesn't come across as realistic or attainable for themselves. And that can be a bit frustrating, and maybe a bit concerning or intimidating to some people because they think that that's what you need to do to reach financial freedom or reach retirement, is invest that unrealistic amount into your portfolio. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah, I want to go even deeper though. I mean, I want to
Okay.
go really into the deep end. I want to take
Okay.
Steve's, comment. I want to talk about, I feel like we should even start off with what we closed with the other week. And it was really about, okay, you want to talk about how much money people are throwing into the market, like how exactly they're doing it. And I feel like so many viewers see young guys, younger than Ryan and I, who are maybe like early 20s, even like 18, 19, and they're throwing thousands and thousands of dollars into the market, and they might be a little bit confused as to how that's happening. Now, Steve, Ryne and I will even open up, what we do and how we're able to throw the money that we throw into the market. We want to be as transparent as possible. But I want to hit on what we spoke about the other week, which is everybody, I think, has to realize, whether it's a fellow YouTuber or even a friend in your network who's throwing thousands of dollars into the market, how are they doing it? You have to kind of question their life a little bit. Are they living at home? Do they have dependents? Like, I kind of look at it like, are they living real life, or are they still in the, fixational, life of like living off of mommy and daddy? And, oh yeah, that's how I'm able to throw $5,000 into the market. And then they're looking at you like, how come you don't have $100,000+ in the market, or $200,000 in the market? Like, how aren't you investing $5,000 a month? And it's like, well, I don't live at home. I have bills, or I have kids, or like whatever your situation is. But I feel like it's important to talk about this, because being able to live on your own and for yourself will actually pay you more dividends, I think, in learned experiences and a growth in maturity, moving out of your childhood home or moving away from mom and dad and actually taking on the responsibilities of life. But Ryne, what do you think about those out there who are still living at home, mid-20s, living off of mom and dad, but throwing all of their money into the market and then kind of pulling the like, haha, I have $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 I'm throwing in the market?
Yeah, I would say that I'm pretty conflicted about it. And this is kind of what we were getting into last week after we stopped recording. On one hand, I think maybe sometimes that important context is left out of those conversations. And so that's maybe where it feels a bit unrealistic to a lot of people watching that stuff. And so I understand that. Like, and these people, or these kids, really, like, they're able to invest probably 2, 3, 4 times what I'm able to invest every single month. But I think that context is important to keep in mind as you're looking at that on one hand. On the other hand, I'm still, and more importantly, I would say, I am stoked to see these people putting their money into their portfolios. If you are 20, 21, 22, 25, and you'll see it amongst a lot of the content creators, especially like on Instagram and TikTok. A lot of these short form guys are younger guys that have, guys and gals, I should say, excuse me, that have, multiple 6-figure portfolios. And I think that's incredible. Like, if I could go back in time, I would kill to be in that position, to be able to allocate my money towards that and build up my portfolio without having to worry about a lot of the responsibilities of, normal life, whether it's paying your rent or your mortgage or your dependents or whatever, because life definitely can get more complicated as you get older and take on more responsibilities. And so I'm glad to see these people take advantage of the good situation that they have before life does get tough. And for those of you who are maybe looking at that, feeling discouraged, thinking there's no way I'm going to be able to invest that month or that much. I've got a house, I've got kids, I've got car payments, I've got daycare, whatever it is. Just know it at the end of the day, like, don't compare yourself to that, because that's not necessarily real life, I guess. And for those people who are in those situations, that'll change for them over time. I'm sure there will be a point in their lives where they won't be living at home, or they'll have more expenses, and maybe they're not able to invest as much. And so with that said, don't compare yourself to that. Really, when it comes to this investing stuff, it is a you versus you game. Investing is very much a journey of self-improvement, I guess I'll say, in more ways than one. Financial self-improvement, like mental and emotional self-improvement. There's just a lot of self-improvement that comes with this stuff. So instead of worrying about what other people are doing, and this applies way beyond investing, by the way, instead of worrying about what other people are doing, just focus on yourself and just do what you can. And going back to the message that Ari received from Steve, it's like, Steve, you may not have $1,000 a month, or whoever it is, $1,000 a month, 2,000, 4,000 to put into your portfolio, that's fine. Like, do what you can. You know, a lot of people will say, and we I think we talked about this last week. One of the most common excuses or reasons, to put it nicer, reasons to not invest is I don't have the money. But it's like, you do, man. If you have $5 to put into your portfolio every week, do it. Do what you can is the very bottom line. And you know, in some capacity, and you can build on that, by the way, whatever the amount is, but in some capacity, the dollar amount isn't necessarily what's important about this. It's more so, especially at the very beginning, it's more so about creating the habit. Wouldn't you say? Like, creating the habit and aligning your actions with someone is an investor, with someone who is building wealth. Wouldn't you say that's the most important thing here?
Yeah, I also think building the habit builds the wealth over the long term, because as you build the habit, well, you've just built the habit, and so you're feeding the machine more often, and you fall in love with the process. Just taking the actions, you fall in love with the process. I Ron, I want to ask you, is this, I'm intense, I know I'm intense and I'm direct, but I want to snip this in the butt, you know? Do you, do you think it's the greatest setup in the world or the greatest setback in the world for these youngsters to be staying at home until, 25 and investing thousands of dollars because, again, they're not living in the reality of
Yeah,
being an
100%.
adult?
Dude, it's such a good question. And we talked, this is a lot of what we talked about last week. There's pros and cons. Like, from a financial standpoint, it's a huge benefit to not have to worry about the expenses that come with living on your own. So, like, from that point of view, it's great. I would say from every other point of view, though, man, get out there, get your own place, get your independence. There's something good and important about putting those responsibilities on yourself. And I think, Ari, you'll be able to expand on this better than I can, but from a long-term perspective, I think there's so much good that comes out of being your own person and not living at home as kids do. I think that there's so much good that comes with placing that responsibility on yourself, like knowing it's on me, paying for the roof over my head, for the food that goes in my stomach, for the place that gets me, the car that gets me from point A to point B. That's all on me. And I think there's something important that comes from that sense of responsibility.
I agree. I think appreciation is also tenfold once you do life on your own and you realize what the sacrifices are. I'm just going to come out and say, I think anybody who is, I moved out at 18. I became a full-time firefighter in New Brunswick, New Jersey, paid for college for myself. And at the end of the day, I think staying at home and living at home because it's cushy and comfortable is a setback. And I think the amount of lessons I have learned and the amount of responsibilities I've been able to take on over the years have then become some of the most, I want to say, pleasurable experiences, the hardships, the good times, the bad times, like all of it, because I've been able to give it all away. And I've noticed that those who kind of set themselves back by jumping on almost like the instantaneous gratification of the cushiness, I just want to stay comfortable and be comfortable and invest my $5,000 now because I'm, 22 or 23 and I live at home, and my breakfast, lunch, and dinner is taken care of, and rent's taken care of, and everything else is taken. So I'm going to throw all this into the market. I think while that's great, it's a shine that wears off, and it's not so cute after a while. And I think when you really get into the real world, it becomes the greatest setback. And I've noticed that, just transparently, like at 7, 8 years old is when I really started to work in the neighborhood and earn money. My parents then split up. And then I was really doing a lot of like odds and ends jobs. I lived with my mom. And I worked,
Yeah.
I for as far back as I can remember, I was buying my own clothes. I would go with the neighborhood gang to this local CVS, and like I was buying things with my own money. You know, it wasn't like my mom gave me money, or you know, it was like I was mine. And I just think those experiences have shaped me to be a formidable force. And I hope I don't sound egotistical here, but I'm going to just say, like, you could take my job away from me. You could take the apart, like all, you could take it all. And because I have my experiences, do you really think I'm going to let life hit me in the face and I'm just going to get knocked down and sit there? No, I'm going to get back up, and I'm going to get back up so quick you won't even know that I fell. And that's where the learned experiences and like I've been here before moments, and I can do this, and I'm, you know, I'm an adult, and this is life, and like it's just it's real. Versus I think some of the softness that I see out there these days, it's coming from a place of like the fictitious world that people are living. I don't need to move out. You know, I can I was just, you know, I was on the phone the other week with this girl. I told you about this last week, with this girl who is almost 27 years old, and she's been, you know, living on her own. And, you know, she was like, I think I'm going to, you know, move back home. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah, you know, when I was in my early 20s, like I just didn't get that opportunity to live at home. Like I moved out and I just didn't have that experience. And that, it made me so upset, because I find that to be one of the most selfish acts anybody can do. Just because you didn't have that experience, what do you think? You could get that at 27 now or at 36? I'm just going to move home because I'm going to move home to earn my, or to achieve my, you know, free breakfast, lunch, and dinners.
Just to avoid responsibility, I think.
Yeah. I don't know. The whole thing makes me upset. I think if you have a full-time job, especially, and I'm not harping on people who, you know, life happens, they get roughed up and they have the cushy pad to go back home for a little bit. Even then, I'm a little bit, I don't know. You know, I'm like, for me, yeah, I remember breaking up with this girl in Manhattan, and we lived together, and it was the biggest turnoff when she moved home, Ryne. Like, she was like, I'm just going to move home. I was like, you have a killer job. You know, you could get any, like, you know, it wasn't like it was an amicable breakup. Like it was a good breakup, but I was just caught off guard because like, you're going to move home? Like that's where you're going to go? Like, I don't know. It's just like, it's the difference. It was a difference between a girl and a woman, or a boy and a man, right? It's like, where are you going to go when life hits you? Or how are you going to build yourself? And I don't know. I just see a lot of people who are investing, you know, thousands of dollars every month. And I say,
and traveling, it's like they'll travel on a whim, and you know,
it's not real.
There's a lot of tomfoolery that comes along with that facade.
Yeah. And now, I mean, Steve's inquiry here, like how do we do it? Well, Steve, I could tell you, first of all, I work my tail off, and it's not just YouTube income I'm making. You know, it's you know, I also I do you know, some consulting, and I'm still corporate. You know, so I have a bunch of income that's coming in, but I'm working constantly, and that's a sacrifice that I make. You know, Ryne and I were speaking for a good amount of time before this, and as we always do, and I haven't gone out in weeks because I'm busy. You know, and I went out just on a date the other night for like the first time in months. I actually like went out. But I'm busy, I'm working. And I think, again, you got to think about your sacrifices. But ultimately, just to answer Steve's question, like I'm throwing, when I can, it's ranging between $5,000 to $8,000 every month into the market. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Good job.
But that's, again,
and you worked to get to that point. You didn't start off ground zero investing that much. It took years to get to that point.
No, I lived at home for a while, and then no. Yeah, no, it did not start off that way. I think when I first started investing, for a while, it was just my lump sum, and I didn't do anything, which was so naive and stupid, because I was always working. I should have just always been investing. But I think when I started to really dollar cost average in, I think minimum every month I was throwing like at least 1,000 in, at least. I made it work. And if I like, whether it was the pay myself first strategy, or it was I gamified my budget, and I just saw how much can I increase the savings rate. And then I increased it like 60%. It was like crazy. And I was like, all right, this is too restricted. I got to come down. At least I know I can get there. And then I came back down. But there were times I was doing 1,000. There were times in 2020 I was pumping a lot in there because I knew that was an opportunity of a lifetime. And now I'm pretty consistent with about $5,000 to $8,000. On a good month, I'm closer to 8, and on not so great of a month, I'm closer to 5. What about you,
That's
man?
really that's really impressive, man. I'm about $1,000 every single month at this point. Um, I do, and I split that almost evenly between my Roth IRA and my taxable account. A little bit more in my Roth IRA, and I want to. I actually have been thinking about this the last couple of days. I'm kind of feeling the itch to bump up my weekly contributions just a little bit, like an extra $25 a week or something like that. But I'm kind of thinking instead of me doing that in my portfolio, I kind of want to just do that in my wife's account and start building hers up a little bit more. So that's something I'm going to be working on here soon. But so yeah, with that to say, I'm at about $1,000 per month, and that's a pretty good balance for me to where I feel like I'm investing a decent amount. I'm able to save a decent amount as well. So for me, it's kind of giving me the best of both worlds. And we've talked about like my savings goals, I think, in previous episodes. I'm trying to stack some cash right now for a few different things. We want to buy another house in the next few years. So I'm kind of saving for that down payment while trying to maybe keep this house that we're currently living in. We're going to need to buy a second car sometime in the next year. We only have one car right now, which kind of ties into something else I want to talk about. But so, and I want to pay cash for that too. I don't want to have a car payment. So that's another thing I'm saving for. So that's kind of really keeping me, those two things are really, and just have a safety net. So those few things are keeping me from putting a lot more into my portfolio right now. But I'm fine with it because there's a purpose behind all of it. But with that said, I hear $5,000, $8,000 a month, and I'm like, dude, I couldn't even imagine investing that amount per month. That just would be so awesome. And I think like for me, it's like, man, even $1,000. Like I'm very proud of myself for even being able to set aside $1,000 per month. And I guess the point I'm trying to get to is it's all relative, because you might be over there thinking, man, I only invested $5,000 this month. I suck. I'm terrible. And that's why I'm saying like why I said earlier, this is a you versus you thing. You have to, it's basically about doing better than you did yesterday or last month, or continuing to improve upon your situation. And when I think about how much I'm able to invest right now, it's the same thing as you. Like I didn't start out investing this month much per week or per month at all. I started out, I was maybe, dude, like 20, $25 per week. And you build that up from there. And just kind of some context, kind of the origin story a little bit, like when, back in the day when, 6 years ago now, when actually, where do I want to start this? So, okay. When I was younger, as most of us, this is the case for probably a lot of us, my living situation definitely was not as good as it was right now. When I met my wife, I was living with two other roommates. It was the worst situation of my life. I couldn't have asked for worse roommates. You think about any quality that a bad roommate possesses, they had it, and then some, had even more. It was a nightmare living situation. But two things from that to say about that. Number one, even though it sucked, it was cheap. Okay, I probably paid, a few $100 a month in rent. Number one. Number two, it was still better than living at home with my parents. Having that freedom and that independence in a terrible situation was still better than living at home. And so then my wife and I, when we moved in together, and at this point, like I'm not making any money at all. I'm just like paying bills, and I'm struggling, man. As is the case for, a lot of people when they're young, but I'm struggling. And then when my wife and I moved in together, we kind of a similar situation, both of us not making a whole lot of money. Rent was decently affordable, probably $600, $700 a person. Not too bad, but still, like with our incomes, it wasn't great. So like there wasn't a lot of gap up until this point, not a huge gap between what we were making and what we were spending. And then when we moved into our next place, that gap was even smaller. So like it made it really hard to invest an amount of money, but still I was doing the best I could at that time. And that very tight spread and the want to invest even more and take bigger steps towards financial freedom, that was good motivation to do something about this spread and try and widen that gap as much as I can. And there's two different ways you can do that. It's number one, increase your income, and number two, lower your expenses. And ideally, you'll do a combination of those two things. And upon doing so, you'll have more money to put towards your portfolio and put into your investments if you want to. And so when we moved here to Vegas, it's like the income stayed here, but the expenses came down. So there's that spread, there's that gap. Still wasn't making a whole lot of money, but over time, and that's when I went full time with this YouTube stuff. Over time, just being able to focus, man, that spread, that income started going up over time. The spread started going down, and it was all, or the expenses started going down, and it was all just because I had that motivation in mind. Like, man, I don't want to be in this situation forever. I don't need a whole lot of money to be happy. I need more than I have today, and I don't want to spend as much as I'm spending today because neither of them felt good. And so just having that sense of purpose or that motivation of getting out of that bad financial situation, made me determined to do both of those things. How can I lower my expenses? How can I increase my income? And you can work on both of those things at the same time. And it's not like you don't have to go from 0 to 100 tomorrow, but you start with like small incremental changes that you can make to potentially lower your expenses to a point where, like Ari said, you lower them, or like Ari did. At first, he lowered his expenses too much, and then he kind of had to pull it back a little bit because he needed a better sense of balance. So find what that looks like for you with those incremental changes. And then even if you're not able to increase your income, which sometimes for some people that's tough, maybe don't start there. Maybe start with something that's more in your control, which is how much you're spending, and go from there. Continue to make those incremental changes. And I think you would be very surprised at how much more you'll find yourself saving and able to invest each month just by even if you're able to save $20 a week here and there, man, that's almost $100 every month, depending on the month. So I don't know. That's kind of how I look at things. Just incremental changes, incremental progress, just you versus you.
Yeah, I love that, man. I like, you started by saying that it's relative to each and every individual, and it so is, because as I was listening to your story, living with the roommates,
My
crazy
rant,
roommates.
my tangent.
Yeah, man, I was waiting. I was like, wait, is this guy gonna finish an hour?
Set your alarm.
I always look. I there's so much to learn from people's experiences, and what I took away from what you were sharing was, first of all, the relativity is so important, because what feels like $1 million to you might feel like a dime to somebody else, and what feels like, again, $1 million to somebody else is a dime for you. And so to your point, yeah, like I'm still gamifying. I'm gamifying all the time. Like, okay, this month I was only able to put 5K in, and what happened? How did that? Where'd that extra $3,000 go? Why did it drop down? Like what happened? So that's key. And I also think it's just key to recognize that. I mean, Ryne mentioned something early on when he started to share, which was that he has a wife. And what comes with a wife and the house and the lifestyle he's living versus the lifestyle I'm living? Well, I can tell you right off the bat, the apartment that I'm in right now, I got my bedroom, the living room here, and the kitchen, and it's a nice little small apartment. It will do for just me and my dog right now. And I don't have another human in this apartment that's we got to fend together, fend for ourselves here in this world. And so I think just perspectively, everybody has to take a breath and be like, okay, my situation is different than this other person. And sometimes you get these, again, it happens a lot on YouTube. You really do have to think about when someone's making their video, right? You could just see are they in their childhood bedroom? Are they, where are they? And the reason why they're probably able to throw X amount in is because they don't have the challenges that you have.
Yeah.
And you have to think about that, because I think it also creates a very healthy mindset for you as an investor, not to compare, as Ron was saying, it's UVU. And so my situation is, I am single currently. I got my dog with me, small apartment. I work and I sacrifice a lot. And I just don't like, there are other people out there who sacrifice. They may live at home and they sacrifice going out with friends, but they live at home. Like, so then the question becomes like, okay, if I'm not living at home, I have my own space, my own apartment, I'm building my life up. How am I still investing 5K? Well, what Ryne was just talking about, decreasing the expenses and increasing the income, is quintessential to anybody's success as an investor in seeking financial freedom in any sense. Now, for me, it just comes down to these sacrifices, which I feel like I'm always talking about, but I don't really go out because I have a goal, and my goal just supersedes some of the things that, like, when I do go out with friends, I don't necessarily go out to lunch with them. I'd rather go for a walk or just grab a coffee. That's how I treat myself. Every Friday morning, I take my dog and I actually go to a cafe, try a new cafe, and we go get a bagel and coffee. And that's my big treat for like the week, or like my ice creams in my fridge. That's it. And that's, I think there's real wealth in keeping your life that simple and knowing that I don't need to go out every night and be flashy every night and this and that. We've talked about this before, but those sacrifices, and and by the way, when you start to make sacrifices like that, you lose people for the best reason. I think you lose people because they might classify you now as like boring, or, like that guy, like a pen. But it's like, I have a goal. I intend to reach my goal. And a matter of fact, the closer I get to my goals, the more I've realized that everybody who's, shied away has actually then come back to me to say like, well, how do I do this? And I'm like, well, I made those sacrifices 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, I made those sacrifices when you were partying, doing keg stands,
It's funny, on that note, I mentioned earlier that like my wife and I only have one car right now, and we've only had one car for about 2 years now, just over 2 years. We've just had one car, and I remember, and I mean, that saves us hundreds of dollars per month. That saves us combined probably like, between $400 and $500 per month. I remember, like, to your point, I remember when I was getting ready to get rid of that car, when the lease was almost up and I was going to turn it in. I would get questions from like my parents or whoever. It was like, all right, so what kind of car are you gonna get next? What are you gonna do? And and there's an assumption that you're an adult, you have to have a car, which I understand. Like, it is, especially, you live in Las Vegas,
I've
you
got
drive everywhere.
rollerblades.
I have rollerblades, yeah. I just run everywhere now. And I was like, yeah, we're not gonna have one. We're just gonna rock with one. I remember like kind of getting side eyes, like, really? You sure about that? Like, you're like 28 years old, 29 years old. You're not gonna have a car? It's like, nah, I'm not gonna have a car. And I can't tell you how much of a number one. I can't tell you how much of a difference it's just made in our savings every month, and by extension, like, I can't tell you how much, because it's been so helpful financially. It's just, you sleep better at night. It's just another way to simplify things in your life. If you don't need it, don't pay for it, basically. And that was kind of like our mindset with this car thing, because yeah, even though it's like you're an adult, you should have a car. It's like, realistically, I don't need one. I work from home. The only place that I really go is like the gym, regularly at least. 90% of the time we go together. Anywhere else outside of that, we're always going together. So what's the point in paying, hundreds of dollars per month for something that we really, really don't need? It just wasn't practical. And so the whole point of seeing that was like, some of those decisions, like, you'll get kind of weird responses to. Yeah, but maybe do them anyway if they're going to better your situation. And I guess with that said, like that, you know, that kind of applies to us in talking about these kids living at home. I guess it's a bit different, but I think you could look at it from a similar lens if you wanted to. I think when you get to the root of it, it's not a right or a wrong thing necessarily, but I think from our perspectives, as kind of the, you know, the old grumpy men, the old geriatric guys, you know, sitting in their armchairs just trying to solve the world's problems. I think from our perspective, like we just look at it and be like, you know, there's so much good that comes from, even though maybe it's not the most practical thing financially, like it's nice to save money at home. Sometimes, you know, Peter Pan has to leave Neverland. And I think that's when we get to the bottom of it, that's kind of what we're trying to say. You got to start your life and have your independence as an adult, and you can't do that when you're sleeping down the hallway from your parents.
So the image that comes to mind, and it just really quickly flashes. Can you imagine a grown individual still being breastfed? That's what
I don't want to.
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
Yeah,
but in my mind, I'm like, that's what we're talking about here, really. Right? Like, do you want to grow up and like become your own individual and take on the world and your own responsibilities? That's, I think, the greatest paycheck. I would rather, you know, only invest $500 a month and live on my own. Say I'm doing this thing on my own. I'm growing up. I'm maturing. I'm gaining the wealth of experience. You know, by the way, I hope everybody else caught that Ryne is also looking, because you shared you're looking for another house. And I think that's also important because I'm over here. I'm not looking for a house right now. And so the way I set myself up, I actually a couple of years ago saved a lot of, this was at the very beginning of my last relationship. I just started saving money because I was plotting my departure from my old company. And I was like, I already knew, like I knew the plan. I knew the whole thing. I just looked, you know, light years into the future, and I was like, I don't want to work at this company forever. And at one point, I kind of want to make a statement and just go on YouTube full time. So I started saving, and I ended up saving about $70,000 to do what I'm doing right now, to have this money on the side paying for rent and certain expenditures. And then my income right now is just driving into the market. Again, a lot of sacrifices were made to do this, but it's strategy. But if I were looking to buy a property right now, yeah, I wouldn't be throwing in $5,000, $8,000 into the market. Again, it's so important. Our situations are so different. And so even though my 5K or 8K may impress Ryne or anybody out there, I am sure my situation is so different from everybody else's that it shouldn't impress you. And you should only be impressed with beating yourself, you know, whether it was yesterday or a week ago or a month ago. Are you investing more today? Are you learning? You know, if you've been watching Ryne and I since episode 1, first of all, I hope you grew since then, you know, in your knowledge base and your mentality, and, you know, let us know in the comments.
We hope you're taller. We hope you're taller too. Like maybe you've gained an inch. Yeah. I could certainly use a couple of those.
I would actually love to know if you guys can go ahead and comment down below what you have learned. What are some key takeaways here on episode 20 that you have taken away from Ryne and I and joining us in these chats? And if you've taken away nothing, also let us know, because like we're here for you, and that would be a shame. I feel like Ryne and I would just have to quit at that point.
I think it'd be a really interesting conversation if we get some good responses to that. Please, guys, like let us know what you have learned from these you know, these tangents basically. But it would be a really interesting conversation to go through some of these and just, you know, kind of summarize the key takeaways from these first 20 episodes. I'd be so curious to see what it is, you know, what people have taken away from this.
Yeah, I mean, look, every now and then, right, like every time Ryne and I jump off the deep end and we're like, I hope that was a good episode for people. And I think, you know, you guys keying us into what you've learned and taking away will help us understand what we could be doing better, or what you guys even want to learn about or have us talk about. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, you know, being here with everybody whether it's here in the deep end or in the Blossom community where Ryne and I receive a ton of messages, feel free to reach out to us there as well. And on Blossom, links in the description and the pinned comment for everybody to check us out on Blossom, and full transparency with everything we have going on in our portfolios. But at the end of the day, this whole deep end experience was meant to be for all of us to learn and to grow together and to hit our financial goals together. I can tell you right off the bat, ever since knowing Ryne and just speaking with him, I have taken away so much from, and I think the biggest thing I've taken away is be steadfast in your strategy. Ryne has never, since the day I met him, deviated from his strategy. And I just think that is one thing to highlight. And no matter what it's been, and the more I've learned about him, like, okay, he's got a wife, and then he's looking for a second house, and but he's still got this strategy, and it's just on lock. And that is something I think everybody should take away from Ryne, if I don't say so myself. Just be so consistent, you're unmovable, unshakable.
Well, thank you, man. And to send a compliment and a takeaway back your way. Ari is a man who is gung-ho. He dives right in head first, and he gives everything he does his all. I know how much, when Ari says that he works nonstop or he works really hard and makes sacrifices, I know the extent to which that's true, and it's more true than he says in these conversations. And so, my takeaway from that is just be a hard worker. Good things come to those who work hard and stay disciplined and stay dialed in. And so it definitely motivates me to stay steadfast and stay disciplined on this path, and continue working hard at it and not get complacent, and continue to put one thing in front of the other. Really, the takeaway has been resilience. And that's an important one, I think, that all of us investors need, really. I mean, anyone. But yeah, specifically as it pertains to investing, because there's ups and downs, but you just got to keep your head down, keep working, stay focused, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
First of all, thank you. There's no right answers here. And I think, again, it really does. That attitude of diving in and just going for it is, and it might sound cliche, but I failed so many times, on whatever endeavors. It's just, there's been more failures than successes, but the successes that I've had have been grand slams. And I'm going to keep failing. I'm going to keep failing. Like I like to fail fast at whatever it is, because it rules a lot of things out. And so being consistent and failing, man.
Yeah. Amen to that, man.
Consistently failing, and eventually you strike a treasure chest.
Well, that's true. Like, tying that to investing, that's kind of how it works. You're going to make so many, across a long time of doing this, across a very long and, successful investment career, you will make probably more investments that don't really do much for you than ones that really move the needle. But the thing about investing is that the thing about investing is the few things that you do right will more than make up for the things that you do wrong. It's really outsized in that way. It's not like a balanced thing where they even each other out. No, historically, the things that you do right will be so right, and they will compound to a degree that you probably don't even realize today, that they will more than make up for the bad decisions or the wrong decisions, or the decisions that really don't do anything, kind of just lay there napping while you own them. And so, yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind for investors too.
I think, when it comes to like Warren Buffett, a lot of executives, they're so focused. Like, I know Bezos is also big on this. They're so focused on only making one solid decision per day, or like at points, like I think Buffett spoke about only making like a handful of right decisions a year. But if you could be so right on those right decisions, it's going to pay off plentyfold for you. And I think the more I started operating like that, like, okay, I'm going to try to do multiple things, right? I have these visions and dreams. I'm going to try it. I'm going to go for them. Let me try to fail quickly at them while making these right decisions, because if you can kind of calculate pretty quickly these right decisions and then try them and they don't work out, and you realize pretty quickly like what's going to work, what's not. I had another podcast I was starting to totally, finance aside, and I started it, and I had $10,000 I put aside for it, and I had a studio rented out, and I had already 2 guests on, and then the deep end actually started taking off, and I had to make a quick calculation, and that calculation was, is this other podcast right now that's literally starting at ground zero, and the deep end at that point was like level 1? I don't know. Is it worth it right now to keep going on that one and this one and my YouTube channel and work? And it was like, no, it's not. And so, put it on the back burner. One day I hope I'll get back to it. But you got to be able to make these quick calculations and be so right that when you're right, it's like, wow, and the deep end was one of them, because we got, just to share with everybody, I mean, we hit 1,000 subscribers in 9 episodes?
Yeah, pretty quickly.
Like, that's crazy for anybody who understands the game of YouTube. And so all thanks to everybody out there, which, by the way, if you're not subscribed to the deep end, now would be the time to do that, to join this community and to swim along with us in the deep end. But it's all thanks to everybody joining this community in these chats. And I'm like blown away. But I do think the deep end was the right move. And that quick calculation I made was totally worth it.
100%, man. And subscribers aside, just the feedback that we get on these episodes, number one, has been like very pleasantly surprising to read some of you guys saying this is like my favorite investing podcast, or I look forward to Thursdays every week so I can listen to this, or whatever it is. Number one, that's been very pleasantly surprising to read. But also, too, I think that more than any sort of subscriber count makes it worthwhile. It's just really, really rewarding and fulfilling to know that these episodes are making a difference in one way, shape, or form. And I think I can speak for both of us when I say that that's definitely one of our driving forces behind doing this, and that's definitely adds fuel to our fire to continue doing it and push to do it on a larger scale tomorrow than we're doing it today. So
week by week, baby. Ryne, you had, before I jumped in with Steve's comment, you had something that you wanted to bring up, and I wanted to circle back to that, because I think we hit Steve's comment, how much we're putting in, the importance of understanding prospectively where you sit versus where others sit. But Ryne, I think you also had something, if I'm not mistaken.
This was the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this kind of ties into last week. And last week's question came from our friend Jake. He sent an email with like 5 different questions that he was hoping to use in like a school project or something. This is what you're talking about, right?
I remember. Yeah. We were talking last week, and there was one question on there that was gold. I'm nervous that you're going to ask that question, because it was really one that you had to think on.
It is. And we've had a week to think about it. And I think this kind of can tie into what we were talking about today. But the question here is, if you could go back and talk to your younger self, how would you go about getting him to start investing so early? If you could go back to Ari at 18 years old or 20 years old or 21, go as young as you want, maybe within reason, not like 11 or 12, but yeah, 9 years old. There you go. But if you could go back and talk to your younger self, how would you convince him to start investing?
First of all, I was investing. I'll start when I was like 20, when I really threw that lump sum of money in there. So I don't know if I need the convincing. So I guess I'll play it at 2 parts. If I had to convince myself, which I didn't need to, and then I'll play it with what I kind of how I would have pushed myself a little bit differently. I would have, for the Ari that, for anybody out there who needs the convincing to get started in investing, I would just say to map out your life and do this exercise. I know everybody and their mother says to like sit down with a pad and pen. No one does that anymore. Your iPad or whatever, and just really write down how you want your life to look. Like, really do that exercise. And then when you go back to read that, start to put financial metrics behind everything that you want to do. It's okay to want a big mansion, but how much is that big mansion? It's okay to drive a Lamborghini or Ferrari if that's what you want, but how much is that? It's okay to have, I don't know, 5 kids if that's what you're looking for, but how much does it cost per kid? And this is all information that you can look up. And then after you do all that math, tally it all up, ask yourself how you're going to afford that. And you'll do math on this and realize through compound calculators, you won't be able to afford a lot of what you want to be able to afford without actually making money while you sleep. And I just, if I really had to convince somebody, I would just sit them down. I'd have them do all, the story of their life, how they want their life to look. Some of the math can help them with the math because that stresses people out sometimes, but overwhelms them, right? And they're like, forget it. I got to do math. I'm out, I won't even start. So sitting down with them, life story, mathematics behind it, and literally say, what type of life do you want? Because this is how you're going to get there. And if you keep going down this way, well, your money's not going to grow and you're not as likely to hit where you want to get. You might find yourself in some troubled waters. Now, for the person who's already been convinced, and what I would have told that younger Ari is actually something I learned, I think, too late in the game, which is crazy to say because it's not that late in the game for me, right? But it's, don't be afraid to lose money. Don't be afraid to put money behind a stock that might scare the living daylights out of you. Because while you're young, at 20 years old, at 19, at 20, at 21, 20, now is your opportunity to shine in the risk zone. You don't, I know everybody's like, oh yeah, SCHD, play it safe, and like all that stuff. But it's like, right now is your kind of one and only shot to take some of your money at least and Hail Mary it into a stock that's really exciting for you. That's maybe, it's trendy, it's exciting, and it's a growth player. Or, oh, there we go. Welcome to the show.
For those of you guys who can't see, Peanut just hopped in my lap, my cat.
I would just say, take your risk. Take your risks while you can. And that doesn't only apply to investing. That applies to life. You want to start a business, but you think you're too young? Start the freaking business. Do something. Make a move. Make a video. Make a podcast. Look stupid. Because you will ultimately be the foolish, naive, stupid person in your 30s or 40s now, like, oh, I wish I started 10 years ago. Well, that's naive. All because you were afraid to start and look foolish. That comes down to the investment too. It's like, if you lose, I don't know how much money someone would have at 19. Maybe it's $1,000. Maybe it's $5,000. If you lose it, guess what? You have literally over 30 years, 40 years to make money and compound it. And you'll never think twice about what you lost. What about you, Ryne?
That's a great point, man. You won't be on your deathbed down the road thinking about that 5,000 you lost when you were 20, 21 years old, And trying to hold on one sec, actually. Let me raise this board. In thinking about this for myself, I picture myself at like 20, 21, living with my roommates. That's, I don't know why, but that's like the time in my life that I immediately go to when I think about answering this question and the version of myself that I'm talking to. And so, that guy in that stage of his life did not have a lot of money. I was working. I pretty much had a job, at least one at a time.
What were you doing at that point? I was a firefighter at that age, so I'm like, what were you doing?
I was working at a gym. I was like front desk, sales, that type of stuff at a gym. And I'd done that at a few different places, but that's what I was doing at that time. Actually, I was doing it at 2 different gyms at once, I think, at that age. And so I had some money coming in, but nothing crazy at all. And I was living with 3 other people at the time in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. So, dude, I was probably paying, this was so sweet. I was probably paying like $200 to $250 per month just in rent. So it's like, And I was paying for gas and other stuff like that too. So I had in my own groceries and all that stuff. So I had other expenses. And when you put it all together, there wasn't much left. But at that age, there was still enough. Somehow I found enough to buy. And this was when I was deep, 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 deep into lifting. I was spending probably 3 hours at the gym, 6 days a week. It was, if I wasn't working at the gym, I was working out. And so I was buying supplements left and right. I was stocked up on protein, the multivitamin, the creatine, the BCAAs, the branched chain amino acids. I had so much stuff that I didn't need. Nothing crazy. I mean, but you don't need all those supplements. You think you do when you first get into this, but like the longer you do it, the more you learn that you don't need that stuff, especially BCAAs, in my opinion. That's a whole nother story. But so anyway, I would go back to this person who didn't have a lot of money, but had enough to buy things he didn't need. And I would tell him like, look, and my parents, I've told this story before, but when I was younger, my parents created custodian accounts or custodial accounts for my siblings and I, and they would always say, like, it was a running joke in our family. We'd give them a hard time about it because I'm 13, 14 years old. What am I going to do with Charles Schwab money? I don't care about that. And so it became a running joke. My parents would always say, you're going to be so happy that we did this for you someday. Someday you are going to be so glad to have this. And so myself today, if I could hop in my DeLorean and go back to myself when I was 20 years old, I would say, look, I know you like to give your dad a hard time about this stock stuff, about this Charles Schwab stuff, but let me tell you, I'm from the future and he is right. Let me just show you like where we're at right now, and let me show you what it will be in 10, 15, 20 years. And that's pretty solid, but let me show you how much better it could be if you started today. And I know what you're going to tell me, you don't have money, you blah, 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 but it's like, dude, here's another tip from the future. You don't need BCAAs. Stop spending $30 a month on BCAAs. Instead, just put that, like, I don't care what it is. Put it in acorns. Just start putting it in acorns. You can figure out the rest later, but that's a start. Just get started and you can go from there. And I promise you, just by putting that, $5 a week, $10 a week in today at 20 years old, I can't tell you how much better off me, future you, is going to be if you start doing this today. So please, like, for my sake, please just start doing this today. I promise you, you will be so glad that you did. I know it's going to suck and you won't be able to buy your cherry limeade BCAAs, and maybe you can't get that extra like vodka Red Bull on Friday night, but I promise you it will be worth it. I promise. And I would also forecast the growth of that portfolio into the future too. And I think that would make a big difference, is showing what these numbers could look like down the road if you just start today, and also knowing that it doesn't have to be much. Anything is better than nothing. And I think that's the approach I'd take. I think that's the approach I would take. Maybe if I was a little bit later, I would come from the angle that actually got me to start investing, which is something you touched on, that if you don't find a way to make money in your sleep, you're going to work until you die. That's what got me into investing at like 25 or 26. I don't think I would have cared as much about that. That wouldn't have hit so hard for me at 20 years old, 21, as it did when I was 25, 26, after I'd had these responsibilities for a number of years for myself, after I had to fend for myself for a number of years. Only then, having those responsibilities, did I know how hard it can be to fend for yourself if you don't have a lot of income and you're trying to figure out and make it work. And anyway, I wouldn't have understood that at 2021, but I do think I would have understood. Start now with small amount. Don't buy the BCAAs.
I was going to ask, do you think your younger self would have been receptive if you really had to think about it? Like, let's really say that you were able to go back into the past and have this conversation. Would your younger self at 13 be receptive?
At 13? Well, that's a good question. If I went back when I was 13, I don't know. It's tough. Because in this situation, man, I'm thinking if I was 13 or 20 and literally met myself from the future, part of me thinks I would take that pretty seriously. But maybe not. I really don't know. I don't know. I feel
you're
like
not Ryne Williams from you're not a YouTube. Get out of here.
It's like, I thought I would have had more hair at that age. 31's not that old. I don't know if I should listen to this guy.
Man, because I feel like I'm trying to think like if I always just, even today when I sit with people, I just try to be the person that I never had. And so I always think back to like, what would that Ari want to hear? What would get that Ari to move the needle on something? And I always like, and that's how I advise people today. When I sit with them, I'm like, I don't want people to make the mistakes that I made. So how would I convince my younger self or this person not to go down that road because of X, Y, and Z? Now, there's always two conclusions. First of all, unfortunately, everybody needs to experience what they need to experience. And, you can avoid that by just becoming wise. Wisdom hits people too old.
Yeah.
But when you read books and you sit with the elderly, like I was always sitting with my grandfather, and the way he told stories and the way he talked about life helped me avoid a lot of things because I mean, that's just what wisdom is. It's like he already experienced X, Y, and Z. So do I really need to? And I think if I went back and, the only thing I didn't have that would have set me up tremendously is me. I didn't have a me. Like, to be honest, my dad was a very successful guy, worked for Kodak and Johnson & Johnson, then started his own business, and like he was always working hard. My mom did not work, but my dad had J&J stock. That's what he had. He had company stock, and he was in the money market. I remember conversations with my dad always about the money market. You should put your money in the money market. I didn't even know what that was. He never like a lot of like I always hear this. A lot of parents or grandparents will say to do this thing, but never tell you how or like what exactly it is. So my curiosity was there. I just didn't have someone who literally sat down with me, opened up the computer and said, here's what's going to happen, and like show me it and explain it. This is what a stock is. It's ownership in this company. And then when you invest in this company, you're going to get this thing called a dividend, or you're going to get appreciation. And what is that? And so that's why I kind of take the approach of like, write it all down, do the math, put someone's life together and like go through it with them. And that's how I got my ex-girlfriend to start investing, because she was freaked out by the market swings, thought she was going to lose everything. And every, week I would just sit with her and be like, well, if you invested this much, and then I'd run it through a compound calculator. And if you invested it for 6 months, or just when we started dating, and like, look how much that would appreciate. And that eventually got her to, something clicked and she got into the market. And I've done that with so many people, but I think it's like the showing versus telling deal here.
Yeah, that's, yeah, I agree, man. I think when you
Hand-holding.
show what, yeah, I think when you show what those numbers, can look like, that makes much more of a difference than just saying you need to do this for reasons X, Y, and Z. And going back to what you asked me, like, do you think you'd actually like listen though? Probably not. And the big reason at that age, I just don't think it would hit home with me, is because I didn't feel that pain yet that I felt at 25, 26. I think I needed to be in a position where I didn't like my job, where I was frustrated with the amount of money I was making. I was frustrated with the situation I was in, and I was looking for a way out. I just think I needed to be in that exact position to really be receptive to the idea of starting it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, those BCAAs, they'll get you.
Yeah. To do something messy, funky with your mind, man.
That creatine, you'd be like, I can't hear you over the amount of creatine that's in my system.
I got creatine coming out of my ears, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I just don't think I just wasn't in the right frame of mind. I wasn't in a bad frame of mind, but I needed to be in a position that I wanted to get out of, to pull myself out.
It's so interesting because life really does shape who you are. Like your environment is everything. And I just didn't have the luxury. I'll just flat out say it right now. I don't have any childhood memories, Ryne. I was just forced to grow up quite young, and I'm not resentful about that. I'm not, self-pitying about that. It was my reality. It shaped me, it built me. And you know what else? It allowed me to be in a position where a lot of people come and talk to me about things. And there is nothing that I appreciate more in my life today than the ability to sit in that seat with somebody else who's going through some stuff and just be like, I get you, man. I get it. What are we going to do from here? And my honest truth is this: a lot of people are just looking for that pat on the back and everything's going to be okay. And the amount of times I've been in this position to just sit with people and just say that everything's going to be okay. And then they wipe their tears, or they get that motivation back and they get back on their feet. And sometimes I'm like, oh man, life's going to hit them so hard again. Or like, good on it, right? But today I have a great luxury of just sitting and watching and just enjoying the show. But when it's time, like I said earlier, try to knock me down though, right? I've just been here too many times in these moments of like, life is, I'm in the ring with life and it's going to knock you out. How quickly can you get back up and really just do your dance in the ring with life and throw your punches when you can, and I love it, and I'm forged in this. And I'm perhaps the reason why I'm like this is because for as far back as I can remember, this is just it. Like, I don't know anything else.
Yeah. You can't.
That's why I think that young Ari would listen, because I was looking for someone to look up to, and I was looking for someone to show me the way. I didn't have it. And that's why when I kind of think about myself going back to that younger self, first of all, give the kid a hug. And second of all, it's like, let me show you the ropes, kid. And I would have done it, and that's when I look back, that's how I know. It's like, sit down and then handhold this kid, show him how to invest, walk him through it, get him excited. And I would have been all over this thing, but my dad did not invest in the stock market. He was in the money market to the best he could, but he didn't really understand anything. It wasn't until I actually actively started investing that my dad started calling me more and be like, what's going on here more? Like, he had his J&J stock. He did very well with that. But he really wasn't invested in anything else. And it was just, yeah, because I always wondered. And I asked my dad at a couple points, like, why didn't you ever teach me how to invest? He was like, I didn't know how. I had no idea, and ETFs weren't really a thing in his day, so it's like, I don't know.
I think in my household it will be so normalized. I'm hoping that someday it will just be, just like through osmosis over the years, it will just be one of those known things where it's not this intimidating, foreign, mysterious, random, numbers going up and down. There will be an actual understanding behind it, just because of, yeah, it's just a part of our lives, and that's just how it is.
It's going to be gamified. Likewise in my household. Like, I think the other thing is, the more you make something fun, the more someone will be inclined to jump in and try it out and
Yeah.
get involved, like,
Yeah.
I don't just give your kids chores, like, give them a plan, like some money, and let's save it. And like, you don't even have to invest it. I just imagine having, kids and saying like, okay, here are the chores. Here's what needs to be done around the house. And this chore is going to, gift you with X amount of money. And this one's going to be Y. And this one's going to whatever. And then you're going to have options. You're going to get the ability to go to the store and spend this, or you can save it. And like, we play the stock market in our own terms.
Yeah. Or it's like, you do X, Y, and Z, and I'll give you, let's just a random number. I'll give you $10 or whatever for mowing the lawn today. Or if you forgo that $10 today, I'll give you $20 next week just for waiting. There's Nala.
Yeah, you're right. She's up from the nap.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, man. Parenting's going to be an interesting experience for sure. It'll be fun.
Life's a trip. It's exciting for everybody. And I think what's awesome, just to kind of close up shop here, Ryne, I'm going to let you close this out in a moment. But I just want to share, like, it's so epic to circle back to this, to be in the deep end with everybody. And like You guys are experiencing life with us. And I think that's the coolest thing. And I hope to be able to experience life with all of you. And the more all of you reach out, whether it's to me or Ryne or the both of us in the comments or whatever it is, the more we're all actively involved with each other, I think the more epic life gets for all of us building this community together.
Absolutely. And to kind of close us out here, last thing before we officially end this, guys, once again, in the comments below, let us know what have been some of your biggest takeaways from listening to these conversations so far. 20 freaking episodes deep. Let us know, what you've pulled away from these conversations. We'd really like to go through them in a future episode, whether that's the next one or the one after, but it'd really be fun just to see what you guys are learning or what has impacted you the most from these conversations. So definitely drop that in the comments below. Also, no matter whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of our future episodes. We're always posting it, but it never hurts to just hit that button one time so you can get it directly in your feed there. But with that, officially close. Oh, last thing before we go. Once again, if you haven't already, download Blossom, see our full portfolio, see what we've got going on in the portfolios. There's a link to that in the description of the video and in the pinned comment. But now, officially, that's it, guys. Really fun episode. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.